I will kick off with that. Okay, I'll just start then. We'll go for it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, a warm welcome to this talk, everyone. My name's John Campbell, and today I'm talking to Professor Tim Spector. He's well known, a professor at King's College London, associated with the COVID symptom tracker app in cooperation with Zoe. Now Tim is a physician, geneticist, with an interest in research and, of course, nutrition. So, Tim, welcome. It's really good to talk to you after seeing you on TV and various things.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure having seen you on YouTube so much. Meeting semi-reality.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, it's a bit of a special occasion, really. It was the 24th of March, I believe, last year, that the Zoe COVID symptom tracker app was launched. Now, what happened there, Tim? Did you approach Zoe? Did Zoe approach you?
It was really about 6 days before, I think. I was cycling home and they just shut down my department, and I thought we have to do something about this, and thought a good way would be to get an app to look at the twins, because I've basically last 25 years I've been studying 14,000 twins. So we get an app to them and work out how they're coping with the pandemic in real time. And I then approached Zoe because we'd been working with them in the last 3 years on doing nutrition intervention studies, looking personalized nutrition. And they had this app that worked so well in people logging their foods. And we thought, can we just transform this to logging symptoms in the same way and get something out there really fast? And they said yes immediately. And 5 days later, amazingly, we were up and running with this app and pretty much beat nearly everyone to it. But of course, we had no idea we'd still be going in a year's time, far less even a week.
Yeah, and I've been filling out every day since and encouraging others to do so, of course. I'm unclear what Zoe actually is, Tim. What actually is Zoe?
Zoe is a data science company that was set up about 3 years ago, really to focus on personalized nutrition. But rather than just using marketing and other people's data to get the information out there, decided to do real science to actually build up a database to give individual advice. And I'm basically, I was giving a book talk about 4 years now ago on the diet myth, and then these two entrepreneurs came up to me and said, why don't we work together? This, I think you've got combine the microbiome with this personalized approach that we're seeing with new monitors and stuff. We could really do something good. And I said, as long as it's based on science and not just puff, and you can raise the money for all this science, that's fine. And amazingly, I didn't believe them, but a few months later they said, well, we've raised the money, we can start now. And they started seeing, thousands of my twins doing these studies called Predict, which turn out to be the most in-depth nutrition studies that have ever been done. And that's really formed the basis of their this product, which now allows people to do these tests at home and personalize their nutrition. So they were the perfect partners for us to deal with, because they were small, startup, dynamic, and they had the team already there that could for a few months just all work on COVID. So it just all worked perfectly. And it wouldn't have been done with a bigger organization, and the government haven't exactly been fast in this area either. And so, it worked. It was perfect timing.
I suspect we're benefiting here from the absence of committees. People can just do things sort of fairly spontaneously.
Absolutely. The other thing is a company can get the consent on an app immediately. It would have taken me probably months to get through my university committees to agree. And so this is the crazy thing about academia is you can do things much faster and better in the private sector than you can in the more ethical university centre, which is actually stopping a lot of research at the moment.
And I'm sure you and me have spent many hours of frustrated time in university meetings.
I won't go there.
It's no reflection on the institution. It's pretty universal. Same in the health service, of course. If you want to do research in the healthcare, there's tremendous amount of ethics approval. Rightly so, but it does delay things.
No, it's gone over the top. So it's now the people have so much power who control the governance and ethics of research that they're only ever looking at risk aversion and they're never looking at the benefits. And it's gone so far that way that the only way you can do fast, innovative research is actually in the private sector. With these new technologies, when you just click on a button, say I accept, and then it's done. And you don't treat people like idiots. And that's exactly what happened here. And that's why we got an app together in 5 days, and why the government didn't get one for about 6 months.
Yeah, it's impressive. So basically, this was a synergy, wasn't it? It's the twins work you've been doing since, or is it 92 now? Did that start, Tim? Yeah. So the twins work you've been doing, all these twins that want to help, that want to collaborate with you and help, all that was kind of ready to go, and then all that was ready to just sort of click into the electronic format where everything can be analysed and immense amount of data can come out there quite quickly.
Yeah, we'd already moved in that direction, but we hadn't fully embraced the app for our twins, and we were still, for the older ones, still using questionnaires as much as web-based. Some had to go in pencil and paper, and even the web-based ones, it took a while to get that uploaded and approved. Again, it's a very slow process. So things that would take 6 months to get the data on a new questionnaire, we suddenly saw in the app we could get that in 2 days, and without all the cleaning up and everything else. So it was a game changer, really, for me in thinking how you can do research, because suddenly, as we went from the twins to 4.5 million people, we could get lifestyle information on millions of people in real time, and have the result ready to be writing up, in a week after it. It was just mind-blowing what you can now do.
Which, of course, is exactly what we need in a pandemic. This is an emergency situation, isn't it? We need the data straight away. And the ethical bit comes in because when I go onto the app, I click the button to give my permission for you to use my data. So it kind of circumvents all the in-betweenies, in a sense, I guess, is what's happening.
Yeah, so any researcher who wants to do anything fast and rapidly has to set up a company to do it, to get around these guidelines in the US as well as the UK that are extremely restrictive on asking any people, medical information or anything, which is, I think, just swung too far the other way. Because we're all happy to give our information to Facebook and Google.
Absolutely.
To give it to a university, and we worked on this project with colleagues at Harvard and Mass General in the US. We should be trusting these places more, because we found that with the app, people did trust us with their data because they knew it was an emergency.
Yes.
And people behave respectfully. We don't always need this degree of safeguarding for things that nowadays in the modern world we're always giving our data to people, and
it's absolutely true.
With it.
Now, you mentioned there that when you wanted to start this partnership with Zoe, you said as long as it's scientifically based. So why is it that the evidence base, it's so important that practice is evidence based?
Well, I've been an academic for 30 odd years, and my reputation is based on publishing papers, and I've published over 900 papers, and it was really important to me that we didn't just have another startup company looking at things like nutrition that claimed to have a special blood test or a hair test or a horoscope or whatever it is, that you then make a bit of mumbo jumbo up on the website and put a few MDs with white coats on it, and it's a science company. So we want to do science that was published in the top journals. We wanted a scientific board that respected the science, not just the marketing. And that was really important to all of us and the other academics that have got involved with Zoe. And we knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I think once you establish that reputation, then again, like with the app, people will tend to trust the product and realize that you're not going to be telling them untruths, and realize that, like any experiment, it's going to get better as the data gets better, and we're going to keep telling you about it. And that's what's happened so far. As, the product's now been live for a couple of months now in the US, because the company's also based out of Boston. And, it's part of a similar sort of concept of people sharing their data, and the more people's personalized nutrition data gets shared, the better the algorithms, the better the understanding of what's going on, and we learn more and more, and people will see it goes into real papers, and we publish in journals like Nature Medicine and other high-ranking ones. So I think hopefully this is a new way of combining, the science with the commercial side, and seeing how we can, do both, because the idea is that the science then becomes self-funding.
Yes. Because
people will buy these kits, they sign up for research in order to get their glucose monitors and their lipid tests and their microbiome scan, and that way it all works.
So I don't think people outside academia probably realize that academics spend an awful lot of time not doing research, but trying to get funding. So if this is self-funding, that would be ideal. Now the COVID symptom tracker app, Tim, I know there's about 1 million people fill it out on a fairly regular basis. Is that round about the numbers?
We had a look today. It's about 1.6 million people, wow. I think, would give us a result at least every couple of weeks.
Yeah,
and I think we've now got nearly 1 million people have given us their vaccine information.
Wow. And up to 4.5 million people, perhaps altogether, have contributed.
Yeah, across 3 countries. So most are in the UK.
Yeah.
And about 10% are in the US.
Yeah.
And a smaller number in Sweden. But it's great to have those 3 to compare when you do particularly lifestyle questions or validation. It takes a lot of, when you're worrying about bias, cultural biases and things like that, it's great to have those 3 countries.
It sounds an awful lot of trouble, though, Tim, to have so many millions of people. I mean, why as a researcher is it so important for you to have millions rather than just talking to half a dozen people? Well, why is that so big a deal? Because
what we're discovering is that human disease is much more complicated than people thought, and that there's like an infinite variety of responses to disease. And like responses to diet, responses to a virus have many different forms. So we found straight away that because our initial aim was to look at symptoms, if we'd just taken 12 people in great detail and tracked their symptoms, we'd have missed anything rare. We wouldn't be able to put clusters of symptoms together. We wouldn't be able to really draw any conclusions that we could generalize people to, of different ages, sexes, ethnic origins, etc. And once you add in all these groups, you realize you do need, if not millions, certainly hundreds of thousands to draw inferences on. And of course, as we've seen with this pandemic, the prevalence of the disease goes from 1 in 10,000 people to 1 in 20 people. And only by having a really big database do you have the flexibility to be able to have an algorithm that's robust in all those situations and can look at all the combinations. And so this is what we're learning is, this is how we pick up rare side effects, while we picked up COVID toes and COVID tongues and all this other kind of weird stuff, plus lifestyle habits and working out people who might be on some particular drug like corticosteroids or, or different vitamin supplements at particular times. So because of the way the app works, it doesn't really matter if we had 4 million or 4,000 people. That's just a bit of extra computing time.
Yeah.
In the old-fashioned way, if you had to send out letters to them all, it would cost you a fortune, or you had to phone them all.
Yeah.
But in the modern world,
Yeah.
you might as well go for millions, and the data is much more reliable and robust. And you can cut out people if you're not sure what's going on and add them back in, and it just gives the researcher much more flexibility, which I've been used to working with cohorts of thousands, which I thought was amazing compared to what other people were doing. But suddenly you move to this new level, it's going to be hard to go back to just thousands again. But I think this is the future. And I think when you think the average nutrition study had about 20 people in it, we've just done a nutrition study on the Zoe app, and we have nearly 2 million people have filled in what's called a food frequency questionnaire, which is the standard epidemiological tool. And that effectively, we did that virtually for nothing, whereas it would have cost millions of dollars and taken me 5 years to get a grant.
But at least, So, and if something is true for many people, then it's much more likely to be true for the individual, isn't it? If something's true for millions of people, it's more likely to be true for you or me as an individual. Not necessarily, of course, because we're all different, but it becomes more likely.
I'd rephrase that. I'd say, I could find someone of exactly, group. I could find thousands of people of your age, of your sex, or and where you live, who've been exposed, with this vitamin or whatever. I know you like vitamin D, and you could say, okay, let's take these 1,000 people. How have they done when look at how they respond to the virus? So that's why it's useful, because it's you can go into a category of people like yourself, because I don't think the days where we just say there is the average American or the average are over. I mean, we need to move to this new idea that there isn't this average, and that there isn't one standard answer for the average male or female.
Yeah. So the validity is coming from these large numbers, isn't it? And the way that this data is analysed. So one problem I always had, I've only done nothing like the research you've done, but little bits of research. I always had great trouble with the statistics. I'm not much of a statistician. So do you have specialised statisticians interpreting this data, or does the app largely do the statistics for you?
It'd be lovely if the app did everything like that and wrote the paper for me as well. Have a team of about 60 people behind the app. Some of them working for the company Zoe, and that bit is part funded now from the Department of Health, and another team in King's College London, also at Harvard Medical School, and in a group in Sweden as well, in Lund University. So we have this big group of people who take the data and we'll crunch it. I mean, it all goes on the cloud, and that you can have programs to sort it into groups. Because if we have now about 300 million data entries or something like this, or 400 million, so you couldn't put it on your laptop. So it takes some people who deal with very big data sets, and they make it into smaller ones, and then once it gets to the smaller ones, the statisticians can start to play with it. But we still, we haven't managed to shortcut the statisticians. Still need them.
They'll be pleased about that. Yeah. So someone interested in this field doesn't need to sort of actually go out and, in the old days, they'd have to do the literature search, then they'd have to design the questionnaire, then they'd have to collect the data, then they'd have to analyze the data. What someone can do now is have a particular interest, have an intelligent question, and then interrogate this database, which is already there. This mass data set is already there, sitting, waiting for the intelligent interrogator.
Exactly. And that's, part of the deal was that we produce this data every day, and we do a data dump that goes to the government, the NHS, and in the UK it goes to a group called HDR UK that anyone in the world can actually access. And if they've got a big enough laptop, they can have a look at this data. And if they want to see, how many people in Scunthorpe had COVID and also, owned a cat, they can do that.
They can make those correlations.
Yeah. So hopefully this will be an amazing data set for years of people coming in and looking, given that we've got regional data on social deprivation, obesity levels, diet, exercise, and we've just completed a mental health questionnaire, which I think something like nearly 1 million people are going to be answering, which is going to be incredibly useful of how people coped with the pandemic and whether that also had any effect on, cause or consequence on their immune systems.
So it'd be very interesting to look at sort of early 60s, bald, slightly overweight guys like me that you could have a cohort of. But what's to stop some unscrupulous person accessing John Campbell's data individually? Well,
none of the shared data has any identifiable parameters in it. So we don't release that. And we don't actually ask for individual names or specific dates of birth or anything like that. So the risk is tiny of anyone doing it. They'd have to maliciously, hack as they could the NHS. So I don't think that's going to happen. So I think people can be reassured their data is safe for this, but we are, whilst maintaining that safety, trying to get it used as much as possible for the right purposes. And I think everyone on the app really feels that their data is being used as much as possible.
Yeah, I certainly had that feeling personally. Filling out information about diet, filling out information about mental health. I was able to do that because, of course, I knew the confidentiality was in place. And I actually found it quite a cathartic experience. You could be completely honest with this app, and that, I found it quite a good thing to do for me.
I think the difference is also that we tend to give data back to people in ways that other questionnaires haven't done in the past. And I think, and certainly government surveys never do.
No, I appreciated that feedback, the feedback about me particularly. Have governments and decision-making bodies like the health service, like politicians, actually use the Zoe COVID symptom tracker app data very much?
Yes, no, I think they have. They didn't make it public that they were using it, I guess for a lot of political reasons, but by back channels, they were saying they were using it every day. It was part of their monitoring process. And even if they had other data, they like to, in a way, triangulate, particularly rates of infection and things like this. And it was used quite a lot in identifying hotspots. And so if you remember just at the end of the summer when there were the hotspots breaking out and they would send in teams to go and try and pick them up, they were using our survey as one of their 2 or 3 tools to work out whether there was a problem in an area. So they definitely have, and they've definitely used it also for changing their rules on symptoms.
Right, interesting. So, that's good to know that. Just tell us what you mean by triangulation in that context, Tim, please.
Well, triangulation really means you get different sources of data that can pinpoint something in a direction. So they might have some regional data that's coming from confirmed cases of PCR positives in an area, but they wouldn't know where it was in that spot that was coming. And then you'd have 2 different sources, a local survey that might be biased, then an unbiased, less biased Zoe survey that was generalizing. And if all 3 of those pointed to one area, then they'd say, okay, that's worth us getting the local authority to go do some screening to see if we can work out where all these cases are coming from.
That makes sense, because I actually saw the graphic that you produced recently where you looked at the REACT study data, the Zoe data and the Office for National Statistics data. And it was kind of comforting to see the not precise agreement, but but generalized agreement, certainly in terms of trend that those data sources are able to give.
Yeah, those three are very interesting because people don't often realize that the three data sets are they're complementary, but they're not measuring exactly the same thing, and they all got different methods. And also there was a difference between prevalence and incidence, and I'm sure you've mentioned this before, but people often fail to realize that prevalence changes slower than incidence. And so often there's been a lag in the media when, say, the REACT study has been presented as saying rates of stops or rates, have plateaued, but that is often a week or 10 days behind the incidence data, where you're the new cases where things are moving again. So it's important to realize that you've got different types of study measuring prevalence, because all three of ours measure prevalence as well, but only ours and the confirmed cases are measuring new cases, which is incidence. So it's important, but you do need always to look at all three in context and worry if yours is the only one showing everything going in the opposite direction of everyone else. But it's also quite difficult because ours tends to be the earliest.
Yeah.
We sometimes have to make a call before we know whether there's any other data supporting it or not.
It's essentially live data very often, isn't it? Which is great. Yeah.
So we are reporting, I think 3 or 4 days after, there's a 3 or 4 day lag in our data, what's happening. That's just enough time to get the reports back from when people have been swabbed. So that's really, and that makes it really exciting, unlike most other research, which is ages ago. You actually know what's happening in real time.
Historical interest, yeah. So just before we move on from the app and big data, I think this is fascinating because people tend to imagine. I mean, you're a doctor. We probably the conception would be that you're in a white coat in a lab, maybe looking down a microscope somewhere. And of course, I know you have done that kind of work, but you're actually moving on now to using big data with the aim of still helping people, still relieving human pain, suffering, and death. But doing this with large scale databases, which really is going to move us. Is it going to move us significantly forward in terms of understanding medicine, healthcare, and well-being?
Yeah, I think this has really taught us how much this technology revolution is going to revolutionize not just research in the way the app has, because no one in their right mind is going to go back to sending questionnaires by post.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, they might do, but I wouldn't fund them if I was asked.
Yeah.
So everything in the future I think will be done with a phone app, because it's so much cheaper and value for money and faster. So the research side is going to benefit, but also I think just general healthcare. The fact that I think people, just by reporting their symptoms, said they felt better. I've had so many emails, people saying it was so nice to have someone to, in a way, confess, as you were saying, it was a party experience, to say, well, I had this symptom and this, I don't know if it was real or not, but, if I mention it, then you can match it up and see, because my GP didn't want to know, hospital was too busy. I think it's really important. So I think we cheered a lot of people up with the app, and that's perhaps something people don't often mention is, how an app can be used to lift and make people at times of pessimism, where they're struck down with disease or whatever, giving them feedback, acting like a surrogate nurse or doctor. And I think that's what we learned, I think. So people now aren't going to go back. They're going to want to be logging their blood pressure this way. They're going to want to be, putting their medicines and seeing, whether other people have any side effects in real time. I think they'll want to be, access to other information. So I really see, particularly in chronic diseases, this really being important. Plus also early warning signs of, another flu epidemic or colds coming through. When can, if you can be part of this early warning system, you'll get to know how to behave in the future. So I see it. The app itself is amazing, but then of course we've got all these wearables and things that people can do themselves without having to go to the hospital or the doctor, that are becoming invaluable tools, so that an individual can take responsibility much more for their own health. Yeah, and I think that's the real other revolution that's happening.
Yeah, I've been advising people to keep a thermometer and an oxygen saturation probe at home because they're cheap, they're easy to use, they collect real data. You can report those numbers to your doctor. The doctor understands those numbers, and it's easy to do with these devices these days. It's
exactly. And now we've got continuous glucose monitors, which you can get with kits like the Zoe kit, but I think they're going to be mainstream within 5 years. You can do finger prick testing now, your blood lipids and some vitamins, as you know. And I think people often feel a bit frightened by this, but if, for example, that comes as part of an app, and you've got everyone else doing having the same experience together, I think you get this great community feel, as we did with the COVID app, of people wanting to take part and not feeling sort of embarrassed they don't know exactly what to do or what it means. I think it's going to break a lot of barriers. So I think it's going to really help this personalized medicine approach. We won't just be dependent on health services and things like this. We'll be able to get our own information. I think it's going to make a huge difference.
As you say, individuals are able to report everything. So, someone gets covered fingers or toes and they're able to report that. They might not know it's linked, but then there was someone in the next town that they would never have met normally that had it, and someone in London who had it, and a guy in Brighton who had it, and you can put all this together. And the symptom tracker app has come up with symptoms that weren't previously recognized. Am I right in saying that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always been some clinician who's pointed it out before we did. Who's a specialist. So, for example, loss of smell, it was the ENT teams that picked it up, or we actually heard about it from some ENT surgeons, but also some doctors in Italy who were seeing patients in ITU. But when we put it on the app, we could actually formally test it against PCR testing for free, because people just gave us their information, and instantly we said, your risk fold is like 15-fold risk if you report that symptom, which is much bigger than anything else. And so we knew it was real. And COVID toes, dermatologists told us, ask people about COVID toes. We're seeing these strange chilblains-like symptoms on people's fingers and toes we've never really seen before. So we put it on, and we got 30,000 people to send us their pictures. And suddenly, a lot of people had this aha moment. So, I was going to my doctor, they're saying, I'm crazy, go away. It's nothing to do with it. And so they felt vindicated. So, and then we had these even rarer COVID tongues that had baffled doctors, some, back January last year, not knowing what it was. And so I think this is a great use of these apps of information sharing. And it just shows you how willing people are to share data. They're not obsessed with data protection, but all the as if someone's going to worry about their toe being shared with the world.
Exactly.
People are very willing to share it, and I think that's what we need to be building on. And I think that's why it's great. And you think how that could work with other diseases and other parameters in the future, particularly in a lot of these early stages about how we might use interact lifestyle with counteracting some of these common diseases, and people sharing comments on their diets, whilst they're having chemotherapy or immunotherapy and all this kind of stuff, that rare side effects and things. It's got amazing legs.
And people genuinely want to help. They really do want to help. Okay, I might be suffering at the moment, but if I can use my suffering to contribute data and help other people, then that gives my suffering a little more meaning, because my suffering is helping other people. I think and
that came through very clearly, particularly with long COVID. So we had lots of dedicated people on the app who, unfortunately for them, they had to keep logging every day. They're still unwell for 6 or 12 months. And, they wanted to tell people about it so that there'd be more research done and help other people understand they weren't just going balmy. Because, again, that was a new symptom, really, that wasn't recognized until we actually got hard evidence that people had been reporting this. It wasn't just them making it up in retrospect that some people thought. So I think absolutely the idea you can help other people came across loud and clear.
And I know you and me have had all these inconsiderate patients who have rather strange symptoms that don't exactly match the symptoms that are in the medical textbooks. So this is kind of taking us beyond that into the realm of individualized disease, isn't it? So, the way a particular microorganism interacts with a particular person is not necessarily predictable, or the way a particular disease process causes clinical features in a particular individual is not necessarily predictable. I mean, does this bring us on to this whole idea of individualized diagnosis, individualized assessment, and ultimately individualized prescriptions?
I think it does show us that there isn't a black and white world of everyone having one size fits all diagnosis and treatment, and that we've got to start partitioning this. And every year we go on in medicine, we always take something simple and realize actually it's much more complicated. Yeah. And we've only got to look at something like cancer. People said, oh, well, there's 2 types of breast cancer, severe and mild, and, you have 2 treatments. And now, of course, there's myriad of treatments, and it's not about the site of the cancer at all, really. It's often the cells or the genes or even the microbes in there, and your individual immune system. So the whole thing, medicine is lending itself really to deconstructing it into understanding all those components, and then trying to get as much data as you can about someone, putting it together with algorithms, and then giving them a personalized approach to it. And I think the paradigms we have with how most of us exposed to the COVID virus, you can get any of probably 50 different symptoms or none at all.
It's weird, isn't it? It really is.
And the same is also true when we look at diet, and our studies are showing that, give everyone the same meal, you get a 10-fold difference in their response to food. And yet and you take both those things, we were told there's only one way of eating, and there's only one way of treating a viral infection, and we realize it's much more complicated. So I think definitely we're going down this personalized route, and we realize that genetics aren't the answer to everything, and we may have reached the limit of genetics. We need to now move on to the next phase and open it up and start thinking about how do we look at our immune systems, how do we look at our microbiomes, how do we look at our metabolism, if you like, and start finding clever ways of putting that together so we can give people the best tailored treatments.
So I know you've got a background in epidemiology, Tim. That's one of the things you've sort of formally studied. How does looking at the diseases suffered from by groups of people help to inform the individual sort of disease experience? Because I think that's kind of what you're talking about, really, isn't it? You're looking at large groups of people and relating that to the individual. Does that make sense as a question? How is the epidemiology relating to the individual?
Yeah, so in a way, we're doing it the reverse of the traditional way.
Yes.
Traditional epidemiology, which is what I taught and wrote several papers on, would be to take a group of patients, say 200 patients with the disease and 200 without, and you just say, well, this group, is more associated with being overweight and drinking coffee, and this one isn't. Therefore, you then tell everyone, okay, if you don't want to get this disease, you avoid obesity and you avoid coffee.
Yeah.
And we realized that didn't really help that much. I mean, it helped a bit, And there were some conditions where, if it's type 2 diabetes and you avoided obesity, you could do it. But for most of them, it was a much more finessed, in a way, answer. So I think what we're doing now is looking at an unselected group of the whole population to see how they respond to mechanisms we know are related to disease, not the disease itself, but do they have the immune system that's related to allergy? Do they have microbiome that's related to allergy? Do they have a blood response to food that's related to allergy? Do they have, genes related to allergy? You put them all together, get an algorithm and give people that sort of risk, rather than this black and white idea of case and control. Because in a way, all of us are a bit of on a spectrum. And in a way, our body is constantly, our immune system and our microbes are constantly fighting to keep these cells in control, because otherwise they would very rapidly go to cancer or give us type 2 diabetes. And so it's trying to work out how do we prevent all this and keep our preventive systems in the best order. And I think that's where things are moving now, which I think is very different.
And this brings together your kind of interests again. It's fascinating the way that this synergizes, because of course you've got a long-standing interest in genetics from the twin studies and the microbiome. So you've got this interesting sort of endogenous and exogenous sort of etiological factors in disease, really. I mean, if we take a disease like COVID or another infectious disease or long-term diseases, I mean, generally, is genetics, how important is genetics in sort of the burden of disease overall, do you think?
For someone's done actually a study on this and did about 300 diseases. Right. And the answer was about between 40 and 50% genetic.
Interesting.
Which also means that it's 50 to 60% environmental.
Yeah.
And we think at least half of that is due to diet.
Right. Tim, one thing I've never quite understood about this relationship is this fairly new term, epigenetic. What does epigenetic mean?
Epigenetics that just means on the gene. It's a Greek word, but essentially it means a way that you can chemically just modify the signals on your genes to switch them up or down, a bit like a dimmer switch on a light bulb. And this is why our cells, our DNA is the same in every cell in our body, but it has little epigenetic signals that make that cell very different, makes a brain cell different to a liver cell. And our epigenetic signals on our body change as we age, and they also differ between identical twins. So that's why one reason that twins are different to each other. And so this is an interesting area. I wrote a book about this called Identically Different, about why twins often were different. And up to about 10 years ago, I realized that I thought this was the complete answer to everything. It certainly has uses in cancer treatments and things like this. But our technology really isn't quite good enough yet to really fully use it. And I think that the differences between identical twins who do differ epigenetically, but don't differ genetically, is smaller than the differences in their microbiomes. And so that's why I switched my personal research from the epigenome, which I was really into in a big way, to studying the microbiome, because I thought that would explain more disease than epigenetics. But I think both have a role. I'm just putting my money on. It's also easier to change your microbiome than it is to change your epigenome in a predictable way. And that's part of the problem, that drugs that are used and vitamins that can change your epigenome are they have lots of other side effects and things because it's such a complex mechanism.
So I'd kind of thought that you're born as identical twins. Well, at the time the zygote is formed, your genome is pretty well fixed then. I always thought that it was the intrauterine development and the first 2 or 3 years of life really that kind of fix the epigenetics, which genes were expressed and which were not. But I think you're saying that even at my age now, I can change my epigenetics. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, they are changing.
It changes throughout life.
In the last 10 years, they've definitely changed, and you'll have some associated with, chronological aging.
Right, okay.
And, even by taking your vitamin D, you might have slightly changed your epigenome. As we know, particularly folate, people who take folate supplements can change their epigenomes in ways that are a bit unpredictable. So the epigenome is still changing, and it does probably change every time you eat. It may change a bit too much to be easy to measure. So some things change slowly, some things change rapidly.
Right.
And that signal changes the way your genes work. So as you get older, some genes get turned on more and some get turned down. And that's what happens from birth, really. As obviously, as we're growing, things like your bone and your muscle genes all get switched up massively. Yeah. And they obviously, you don't need them once you get to 18 or so, and then they get lost and other ones take over. So we're much more flexible as humans than I think we've been.
Right, interesting. Yeah.
And that's real part of this idea about us all of us are totally unique, even identical twins, and that's and that's really the thing that struck home to me, how people who look the same, have the same mannerisms, whatever,
yes,
our bodies are still working very differently, which means that we can't always assume that health advice that worked for someone else is going to work for me. And that's, in a way, the essence of these studies, the predict studies we're doing with Zoe, is showing this unique difference between people, so that you probably need to do some actual tests on yourself to work out what food, supplements, exercise plan, lifestyle is really best for you, and actually test it empirically to be sure. I mean, there is some general guidance that most people don't disagree on, but that only gets you so far. And I think we've now crossed that bridge that says, there isn't one set of advice that's going to work
for everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm much more flexible than I thought. So, I've been teaching genetics and stuff for about over 30 years now, and used to say the genome's pretty well fixed when you're a zygote. Then the epigenetics came in, and the importance of the first 1,000 days of life. And of course, that's still important. But now I realize that I still have a flexible epigenome, which is good. So it means I'm really, what I do now can still genuinely influence my health on going into older life, doesn't it?
And exactly. So say you change to an even healthier diet than your current northern diet, John. You can have
not perfect.
We can not only you eat something that goes through to your gut, your microbes break that down into other chemicals. They would help your immune system. They would send out other signals to the rest of your body. Obviously, the immune surveillance system fighting cancer, but you'd also interact. You get interaction between your microbes and your genes directly, so that they send signals to each other through their genes, so they can switch each other on and off epigenetically. So
it's amazing, isn't it? Amazing.
It is amazing, but I think it's a good message, because I think the original genetic message was a very depressing one. All I can do is blame my parents.
Choose your parents carefully.
And I think that's really the wrong message. There's a lot everyone can do, to change their destiny, and our bodies are really well suited to do that. And this is, it comes back to Lamarckism and other sort of soft inheritance. But in a way, the data is even better, because Lamarck didn't know about the microbiome, which is another way to really change ourselves.
Just give us a quick background. What is this microbiome? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. So the microbiome is a community of up to 100 trillion microbes that live inside our gut, most of them in our colon. And they weigh, if you put them all together, they weigh about the same as a human brain. And the best way to think of them is as a virtual organ. Okay, so it's like you invented, so suddenly, 10 years ago, we suddenly discovered this organ that was there in our bodies, our liver or our pancreas. And in that organ, you've got all these different microbes, but basically they all serve as chemical factories. They are pumping out tens of thousands of chemicals and vitamins and metabolites that go into our bloodstream. And that's their unique value. And they keep our immune system in check, stop us getting food allergies. They'll fight COVID appropriately. And they work with all the cells lining our gut. And they also send signals to your brain, which influence your mood because they produce dopamine. And they also will decide whether you're full or you're hungry. They can send those signals out. And they also interact with every medicine or supplement you're taking. So to break it down at different rates, explaining why some people don't respond to some medicines. We used to think that was only genetics, but actually realized that actually the majority of medicines interact with our gut microbes, like things like Tylenol, paracetamol, work in some people or not, depending on what their gut microbes they've got. So it's an incredibly complex mechanism. And of course, you've got the metabolism as well, how fast you get a sugar or insulin peak, and how fast you can get rid of your blood fats from your body. So these are also controlled to some extent by gut microbes. And so increasingly, it could be seen as, this after your brain, the second most important organ. And so once you understand that, it really means that you have a totally different idea about food, because the whole point of eating used to just be fuel that's tasty. Now it's feeding your gut microbes to keep your whole body healthy.
So this is the prebiotic idea, isn't it?
Yeah, everything that your microbes eat is a prebiotic, which is most good food and not most bad food.
How do I optimize my microbiome, Tim?
Okay, a few simple rules. Eat 30 different types of plant a week. And that's not 30 types of kale. Remember, nuts and seeds and herbs count as plants. So sprinkling stuff on mixed seeds on your yogurt gets you off to a flying start. And picking variety, when you go out, try and get something new. Try and have high polyphenol foods. Polyphenols are defense chemicals in plants that used to be called antioxidants. And we never really understood what antioxidants meant. But now we realize that polyphenols are like rocket fuel for your gut microbes. And the more they get, the more good chemicals you'll get out. And high polyphenol foods are in dark fruits, berries, nuts, seeds, and in a few strange things you wouldn't anticipate, like coffee, green tea, dark chocolate, and red wine.
All quite acceptable food products.
Exactly. So, it changes a bit your perception of what healthy food is. And then have regular fermented foods is the other way, which is the probiotics. I'm a big fan of probiotics, but mainly as real food.
That's actually eating the organisms, isn't it?
That's right. So you have the live microorganisms there, and we know that they do hang around in the body long enough to send out chemical signals to really make the other microbes that are resident there give off the right healthy chemicals.
I think that's the main thing we don't do in the UK diet, isn't it? The fermented foods.
Yeah, the US and the UK diets are really poor in fermented foods, and that's for cultural reasons. Many other countries in Scandinavia, Central Eastern Europe, and the Mediterranean always had homemade yogurts as a base of what they ate, and these kefirs, which is fermented milk, and more from Russia and Central Europe, things like kombucha. And of course, the South Koreans, are one of the healthiest people on the planet, and they eat kimchi, which is basically Asian sauerkraut. But
I work with Koreans, and they literally have kimchi with every meal, including breakfast. And after a few days, you get used to it. It's quite good.
The first day at breakfast is a bit tricky, but
it's a bit crunchy, but it's get used to it. Yeah, it's good.
So that's they're the good things.
Yeah.
And then avoiding ultra processed foods.
Yes.
And artificial sweeteners, which harm your gut microbes, is the other important message, as well as avoiding too much snacking. Give your gut microbes a break of ideally 12 to 14 hours every night.
Yes.
So that and try and just have your meals and your snacks around 2 or 3 periods during the day. I think that's the other big lesson that I learned.
This is the intermittent fasting, but within a 24-hour period, that seems to.
Yeah, but it fits into the microbiome hypothesis because they prefer that. They actually like a rest. And it's like the American football analogies, it allows us sort of, the offense goes off when the food's out of the way, the defense comes on, and they're specialized at tidying up and getting things out of the way and clear up your gut lining and improve the efficiency of all that, which reduces inflammation and everything else. So give your gut a rest is the important thing. And this idea of we have to be grazing all the time, and I cover this in Spoon-Fed quite a lot. A lot of these diet myths that
excellent book.
Mainly propagated by the food industry, of course, so that they want us to snack, they want us to have ultra foods, which do taste nice, but they're bad for our microbes and they make us overeat as well.
And artificial sweeteners are generally bad for our microbiota as well, as I think.
They're bad for microbiota, and trials have not shown they have any advantage over sweet drinks, apart from your teeth.
Yeah. These polyphenols, Tim, are they the same thing as what we used to call flavonoids?
Yes.
The antioxidants, yeah, got it.
So the terms are often used interchangeably.
Right.
It's confusing. I think I'd like, because it should be polyphenols and polyphenolic compounds.
Yes.
But if everyone just used this one word, polyphenols, as the largest group, I think we wouldn't have that. And within that, they're all antioxidants, but there are occasional antioxidants that aren't polyphenols, like vitamin C or something like that. But in general, they all do have a similar role. But we used to think they acted directly on the body, directly on the blood vessel. But we now know that, as far as we know, most of them work by triggering something in a microbe that then produces that change.
Right. I'd assumed that they were working at the level of the cellular metabolism, that they were mopping up free radicals within the cell itself, but they're actually working through the microbiome intermediaries.
I think that's right, because the microbiome produces many more metabolites than the human cells. And so they're unlikely to be absorbed straight away without interaction with the gut microbes that just will tweak them and perhaps help them get to the right spot as well, because it was always a bit vague, that concept of antioxidants affecting the vessel wall and things. No one knew how they got there or how to stop them.
Yeah. How long does it take to recover after a course of antibiotics, Tim?
Again, one size doesn't fit all. Some people never really have a problem. Most people will take several weeks. Some people, it takes 3 months or more. And people roughly divide into those 3 groups. But in general, the problem is if you have a second course within, say, 3 months, then you're much more likely to have longer term problems, which can last a year or more. And very rarely you get some nasty diseases like recurrent C. diff, which is caused purely by antibiotics. So,
which I've smelled quite a few times.
Let's assume you're somewhere in the middle. This is going to last, you're going to be unwell or your gut microbes will be recovering for several weeks. And so it is good to try and help them out. Make sure that you really focus on your diet during that time.
We still get this C. diff, of course, the Clostridium difficile, but people don't always realise that it can cause death. People have died from.
Well, thousands die every year, yeah, particularly in the US, where it seems to be even more of a problem because antibiotics are given out even more freely than they are in the UK. But yes, and of course, both conditions are now, the number one treatment for both is a microbiome fecal transplant.
Yes, indeed, which is the ultimate probiotic event, really, isn't it?
The blunderbuss probiotic, yes.
Yeah. But of course, that wouldn't last for long unless that was accompanied by giving the appropriate fibers and prebiotics and polyphenols after that. Otherwise, those original bugs would just gradually die out if you weren't feeding them, presumably.
It doesn't seem to be the case, interestingly. So these people are so sick that they've basically got virtually no microbes in there that are healthy. It's got a few stray renegades that are, have run amok, and they're quite easy to take over and recolonize with a healthy microbiome. And obviously people will drift back if their diet is poor again.
Yes.
But it is remarkable. They don't need much help. And it is at least 90% people cured with this. And the cure rate before with other powerful antibiotics was only about 25%.
Yeah, you're giving more antibiotics to treat the problems caused by the antibiotics. Absolutely, yeah. Just a bit of a ludicrous question, Tim. In a sort of a hunter-gatherer situation, you would have diarrhea from time to time. Do you think the appendix might have a role in preserving bacterial cell cultures for recolonization of the colon, or is that a bit silly?
No, that's one of the current theories, which I quite like.
Yeah. Would seem to fit in, wouldn't it?
I mean, everyone knows who's had a colonoscopy or they've had a washout for some reason or a bad infection, that you can be washed out, but within hours you magically have all your gut microbes back. And so part of it is things like the appendix, but I mean there are these tiny folds in our we've got meters of
so it's all kind of wavy inside, isn't it?
Yeah, people say it's like tennis courts worth of of area of our gut where microbes can hide in little holes, put their head down like that, come out of the nuclear shelter, and then they recolonize because they can get going again. When conditions are right, they can have sex every 30 minutes and have more babies. So I think that we've got this really brilliant defense that works pretty well. But again, with antibiotics, if they get hit on the head just as they're coming up, that really weakens them again. So most people can do pretty well on one hit of these things. It's when you have these multiple uses which our body would never intend.
Yeah. I'm unclear, are fungi part of the normal microbiome or not?
Yes, they are. So it's been hard to quantify them because the DNA tests don't break open their cells easily, and they are much bigger than all the other. So it looks like there's not many of them because they've just got one set of DNA, but because they're much bigger than bacteria, we underestimate. We think possibly up to about 4% of our gut microbiome is fungi.
Okay. And it's fungi is eukaryotic, of course, isn't it? It's the more complicated animal type cells rather than the simple bacterial cells.
But we think they are actually beneficial, particularly for our immune system and fighting allergy. And so this old-fashioned view that fungi cause disease is very, very wrong. And
so about 4% of the microbiota is fungi, and presumably that's having this important homeostatic regulatory view along with the bacteria. And presumably there's presumably thousands of different, what's the right term, species of bacteria.
Yeah, each person has thousands. Each person has about up to 1,000 species.
Right.
But they also have strains of each one.
Right.
Maybe 20 strains of each one. So you've always got a totally unique set of gut microbes.
Yeah.
And of course, there are across the population, maybe 10,000 different species, but each person will only have a selection of them.
Right.
Which varies between Africa and Europe and other places on evolution and on environment as well. And we've adapted with us. And so and also been changed by things like antibiotics over the time. So we only have half the species that hunter-gatherers have in Africa, for example. They have many more. We believe that the more you've got, the healthier you are and the better your immune systems.
And presumably the same way that there's many different species of fungi that do things that aren't necessarily well identified, but interact in complex ways with this emergent characteristics of affecting the brain, affecting the immunity, and all the other beneficial things you've talked about.
Yeah, and some people used to use fungi as treatments, cholera and things like this. So people used to, scrape off bits of bark and say it used to cure cholera. I'm not proposing that, by the way. But
no, we don't prescribe on any of these videos.
Occasionally there is some truth in some of these. These old, and some of the Chinese used to use a lot of these things in the past. So in a way, using microbes to treat infections, which seems very weird to us, but is now starting to make sense.
No, we in the old days, it was viruses bad, bacteria bad, fungi bad. You got thrush in your mouth or vaginal thrush or whatever, obviously bad. Then we realized there was good bacteria and it was still fungi bad. But now we're realizing that the bacteria are good and fungi are good, and it's all this complex interaction. It's amazing, I've been studying physiology really since I was about 18, I suppose, and still don't know anything about it. It's and now there's this whole new complete paradigm of thinking, which is the microbiota and the way it interacts. It's so
I think what's really important is, because of the complexity, we've got to keep coming back to these broader concepts, and we have to keep changing our ideas of these and not be too closed about it. So I think that's really important, that we don't just because the textbooks which were written 10 years ago, say this, doesn't mean that has to be true. And we've got to start. We've got new ideas now of the immune system. It's very different to, what it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Epigenetics, genes, microbiome, and I think it's realizing that everything's interconnected, and we mustn't try and make one thing the villain. And I think this is the human tendency to always pick out one villain and one cure.
We want a simple answer, don't we?
We love a simple answer. We want to just say, I just want to take that vitamin supplement and all my problems are over, or I'm going to cut out gluten from my diet and I'll never have another problem again. And of course, once you realize that we're part of this huge mechanism, we just need to take a more holistic view. So how do I get the whole thing to work together? How do I understand the best way for my body to work, that it all fits? And then, the rest will follow. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's the longer term view we should all try and get. How do we get our sort of equilibrium right?
Yeah, and it's exactly the same with immunity, isn't it? The equilibrium in that. We need immunomodulation because, we tend to think immunity, inflammation, good, lack of inflammation, bad. But now, of course, we know that so many diseases are caused by inflammation and disorders of immunity. And this is another one of your fields, of course, Tim. You were a rheumatologist. You still do rheumatology work. So that's an inflammatory disease. Am I right in saying that?
It is, and it's the immune system. Most of the conditions we saw were autoimmune diseases where the body's immune system is overreacting, and it's like it's always trying to fight an invader. And we think autoimmune diseases weren't nearly as common 100 years ago, and they're not as common in Africa and developing countries, because our immune systems are always fighting bugs. And the idea is that autoimmune disease and food allergies have arisen because, in a way, there's, they don't have much practice when they're young to know what's friend and foe. And so, if you think our immune system is pretty amazing, and as well as our microbes, can detect whether, we're ingesting some poison, eating some, I don't know, little bit of food poisoning, or we're eating something that's a berry that's healthy, or and when it goes wrong, someone's immune system microbes will recognize a peanut as suddenly a foreign deadly threat.
Yeah.
So you think all that training about how we know which foods to eat and not eat, and which bacteria, which of the 1% of bacteria, like salmonella, we want to get rid of, and which we are happy to accept. And that's an incredible system that we haven't been training it right, and that's why we've got the system of allergies and autoimmune disease where it's just overreacting. But on the other side, people with autoimmune disease overreacting are getting less cancers because their immune systems are more finely tuned to sensitized to pick up those early cancer cells and kill them off. And that's the basis of this new treatments, these new immunotherapies that are curing previously incurable disease like melanoma and kidney cancer. So again, it's all about this balance, and we get that balance right, then we optimize these amazing bodies we've got.
Yeah. And more diseases are now recognized as autoimmune. I mean, it's only in the past 10 years that diabetes mellitus type 1 really, I think, has been recognized as an autoimmune disease. And
about 40 of them now, yes. And there's probably many more that are just under the radar and hard to diagnose.
Yeah.
If you can't pick up the antibody, in my lifetime, they created many more in my career than happened. And they do tend to come and go. Some become more common over time and some less common. So, and become less severe. It's quite interesting. But again, immune drugs have totally changed prognosis for many of these, and are now curative. So again, understanding our immune system has been very helpful for that.
And no, I think the way that these things interact with the big data we've been talking about, the potential for learning so much more over the next few years, it's really quite an exciting time. Now, I know you've got to get away to another meeting in about 7 or 8 minutes, Tim. So just tell me what's going to happen for the next year with COVID, please.
Well, with my crystal ball,
yeah,
I think that countries that are vaccinating fast, like the UK and the US, are going to see cases drop throughout the year down to fairly low levels. There'll be outbreaks because countries around them won't be vaccinated, and there'll be plenty of cases coming in. And there's increasing stories even about pets and animals contracting this disease, which means that it's going to be around us. There's no way we're going to get COVID zero. And so, but I'm hopeful that it's going to become a milder disease, that we're not going to, with the vaccinations and probably with evolution of the virus, it should turn into a milder condition and not be affecting our life nearly as much as it is at the moment. That's my prediction. But I think every winter we're going to have a little bit of a upturn, and of course we'll have to deal with old-fashioned flu again.
Yeah. Which has been mercifully absent this year.
Which completely disappeared. So that will be interesting to see how that competes with this. But I think we'll be in a better position to deal with it. And I think we've now got, tests for it. We can see if it's coming. We've got genetic testing. We've got vaccine boosters. So I, unlike some of my epidemiology colleagues, am more optimistic that, these deadly mutations can occur, but I think the chances are that we'll be ahead of it. And given the better weather in the Northern Hemisphere, we'll get most of our population vaccinated in time. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. And I think people now know much more about the virus. They know how to defend themselves. And also the plus point is people have realized about, how important lifestyle is in fighting this. And, we've got some data coming out about the importance of the diet in preventing severe COVID. We know about improving their immune systems more. And I think, we'll start be seeing, this will just be like a bad flu season that we just take a bit more attention of. And everyone's now an expert, so it should be easy.
Indeed. Will it go away in 10 years, Tim, or is it here forever?
I think it'll probably be so mild in 10 years that we don't worry about it.
Right. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
But that's a wild guess. It could evolve in any way. Just most have tended to evolve to milder forms. I'd like it to go away, like most people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Last question, Tim. Is there going to be another pandemic after this one, or is that the world finished with pandemics now?
I think this is just the beginning. Well, I think this is, if we look at SARS and MERS, it's either number 1 or number 3, depending on how you defined a pandemic. But I think we're going to see more of these as we disrupt the animal community, and we just have to be better prepared next time. And hopefully, I think we might have considered ourselves lucky.
This time, absolutely, yeah. I didn't know much about viruses, and apparently in the UK there's something like 10 to the 22 types of virus. It's just unimaginable, all these viral particles or organisms or whatever they are just sitting there, and many of course come from animals, and the risk is that we are so similar to animals that there will be this spillover infection, and other pandemics could come. And do you think that the live monitoring that things like the COVID symptom tracker app and the Zoe facility could give us an advance warning of the next pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big advantages of the apps, particularly ours, which focuses on the very first symptoms, where we will see a blip. And this is, of course, what wasn't available, at the start of last year. We had nothing apart from Google searches for cough. I think it was about it, but
yeah, that's right. Which there were a lot of in late 19 in Wuhan, of course. Yeah.
So I think this has got to be something that is maintained long term, and hopefully there'll be some volunteers out there who want to be the canaries or the lighthouses.
Absolutely,
guard themselves around the world, helping everyone fight this.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to encourage that. And of course, all the links we'll post on the description that people can download that. So I think this is great, Tim. I mean, but very often this sort of medical research is carried on in these ivory tower type of institutions, isn't it? And a few select clever doctors will read it and they'll nod appreciatively, and then very often it will be forgotten about. But the whole point of this is to relieve human pain, suffering, and death. At least to me it is, and I'm sure it is to you. And this kind of the technology now, not only can we monitor things, so we can get it out there, we can get it to more and more people, and hopefully communicate this to anyone who's got an interest to listen, and get more people involved in it. Yeah,
no, I think it's been a great partnership really between scientists and the general public, and the two-way exchange of data, I think, has been a fantastic example really to the whole world about how we can cooperate together and educate each other.
Well, Professor Spector, thank you very much. You've given us an hour and a half of your valuable time. I've certainly found it fascinating, certainly learned lots of new things, and I'm sure lots of people are going to get a lot of benefit from this talk as well. So thank you very much.
Been a pleasure.